Okay.
I think we're good.
Take a deep breath, everybody. Well, I'd like to call to order Borough Bath Council meeting for Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. I'm going to ask our junior council member, Wolfarb, to lead us in the pledge to the flag, and if you can please remain standing for a moment of silence for recently deceased past council member Sterling Heckman.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Manager Flynn, will you please do the roll?
Mayor Mirabito.
Present.
President Hesh.
President.
Vice President Ergot.
Present.
Pro Tem Mirabito.
Present.
Councilman Hamadeh.
Absent.
Councilman Lysacki.
Present.
Councilwoman Angst.
Present.
Junior Councilperson Goldfarb.
Present.
Manager Flynn is present. Solicitor Krass is excused. Engineer Madison.
Present.
Zoning Officer Sean Light is excused.
All right, so pausing there, the mayor would like to swear in Councilwoman Lauren Bolsnake so that she can be included formally in the roll call.
Come on up. Yeah, I know, right? Stand right in front of me here and raise your right hand. And then you're going to repeat after me.
Okay.
I, and you're going to say your name. And you're
Okay.
Okay. I
Lauren Bolsnake,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support, obey, and defend
that I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of this Commonwealth.
and the Constitution of this Commonwealth,
And that I will discharge the duties
and that I will discharge the duties
of my office with fidelity.
of my office with fidelity.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're gonna sign it right here. You sign here. I'll have somebody to test it and I'll give you this back.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
All right,
There you go.
One, two, three.
Thank you.
all right, Brad, if you want to formally call roll for Lauren.
And Councilwoman Bolsnake.
Here.
Hey.
All right, everybody, thanks for coming tonight. A couple of things first, the main purpose of tonight's meeting. Last year, 2023, the Borough Council recognized the importance of continuing to address and manage municipal separate storm source system, otherwise known as MS4, and the requirements dictated to the borough via the state. Therefore, in 2024, borough budget was adopted, keeping MS4-related projects front and center. The borough had conversations and will be working with engineering and legal professionals this year to further develop Bath's MS4 program as required by the borough's 2023 approved pollution reduction plan. Bath Borough, looking for further specialized guidance, has engaged the professional services of Salzmann Hughes, attorneys at law, for the purpose of assisting the borough with developing its MS4 program. The consideration of a stormwater utility fee and to potentially establish a stormwater authority. Let me stress, this does not mean that a stormwater authority is happening tonight. What it does mean is the borough will be studying the concept of a stormwater authority with Salzmann Hughes, exploring options to include final decision-making packages that council may enact at any point in time this year. The borough is being led by attorney Lee Stinnett, who is a shareholder of Salzmann Hughes. Attorney Stinnett practices environmental law, zoning and land use, general litigation, and municipal law. Attorney Stinnett serves as a solicitor and special counsel to several municipalities and authorities. His work involving the stormwater disciplines, creating stormwater authorities, and crafting intermunicipal agreements is paramount in helping Bath navigate its compliance under state and federal MS4 laws. With that, I turn the floor over to Attorney Stinnett for his presentation. As a reminder to the public, this is an ongoing process. We thank those that are in attendance, and we ask that you please stay informed and check the borough's website. Go to the community menu, click on the rainwater runoff pollution control page, then click MS4 Committee and MS4 FAQs page, as these will be updated frequently. Attorney Stinnett, I know I talked to you earlier. Would you like interaction through your presentation, or would you like to do your presentation and then have interaction?
I am good with interaction throughout. Unlike a lot of attorneys, I don't like to hear myself speak. So the more we can engage in some question and answer, I think that often is more beneficial to you all, and then I think also to the public, because I think it provides a little more perspective from you versus me rambling about the legal needs and wants.
All right, so without further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, as the slideshow shows, this is a presentation I actually gave last year to Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs relating to funding stormwater management programs. This presentation is intended to explain why, especially for a borough, it's probably more appropriate to consider the authority avenue that you're considering. But even then, we generally recommend to our second-class townships that they also look toward the authority as the better vehicle for stormwater management, despite the fact that they may have some additional legal authorizations to move forward with a fee on their own behalf. So, what I hope to do here is provide sort of the reasons that this is probably the better vehicle to consider for your community, but frankly, most communities throughout the Commonwealth. We'll talk about, the process a little bit, the advantages, some of the pitfalls you might expect, and answer any questions you might have. I think that when you look at, the present day, and we experienced this yesterday, for better or worse, these rain events are more and more common, more and more destructive. And that's, looking at a snapshot in time, that's what my clients are experiencing. So it's becoming more and more important to find a viable funding mechanism to deal with that problem. That's ignoring the regulatory component. When you look at most of the communities that I've assisted with their stormwater programs, most of the regulatory aspects in the background, the public really, they don't care so much about the reports you have to submit to DEP to ensure your compliance. They're probably not going to see much of the stream bank restoration projects that you might complete, but they're going to notice the benefits from fewer issues with flooding on your streets. That they're going to start to see those things. So in my experience, when we helped establish these programs, the comments we receive from the public are, we didn't expect to see these types of benefits from the program, and it's kind of surprising. So I want to focus on some of those as well, because although we're really looking at tackling the regulatory issue, what we're really hoping to establish is a comprehensive stormwater program that's going to deal with all the problems that boroughs such as yourselves and others throughout the Commonwealth have experienced. So all that being said, I don't have to share this one. I am your lawyer, so I don't need to give a disclaimer, but if any of you all have questions, I often say, meet me afterwards, we'll go grab a beer, I'll give all the advice you ever need, and I'm your lawyer for the night. So my name's Lee. I'm a shareholder at Salzmann Hughes. I've been working on stormwater since the Authorities Act was amended in 2013. I actually helped craft that legislation with the Authorities Association to really help advance the ball, because we were continually running into these additional issues with stormwater, but we didn't really have a mechanism to deal with it other than taxation. And we'll talk about why boroughs in particular might have particular issues with funding through taxation, but also some of the issues we've run into, which we'll touch on in some of the stormwater case law provisions very, very briefly. So why do we have stormwater challenges? And well, one is we have these heightened environmental consciousness issues that have driven regulatory efforts at both federal and state levels. It's an unfunded mandate. It's coming down from EPA, but we're also facing pressures from our neighboring states, Maryland and Virginia, to do more than we're doing. And it all started with the Chesapeake Bay Initiative. Chesapeake Bay, I'm from Virginia. I spent a lot of time in the Chesapeake Bay. I love the Chesapeake Bay, but the first step at dealing with the Chesapeake Bay Initiative was to look at the sewer plants and say, well, we have you under a regulatory permit. So let's focus on that and let's make you do significant upgrades to your wastewater treatment plants to the tune of about $1.8 billion. For, you probably know this better, a couple percent of reduction? So billions and billions of dollars to barely move the needle. So once that happened, Virginia and Maryland started to get upset because we were still sending a significant amount of pollution to the waters of Maryland and Virginia. We weren't doing our fair share to protect the bay. So EPA said, well, where else can we look? Well, we have municipalities and they have another permit. They have a stormwater permit. So let's look at that and make that more difficult to comply with and start increasing the regulatory burden there. So as they started to turn the screws, they've ignored ag. I'm from a more ag-based community where I live currently. And let's face it, they might tag ag for a couple $100,000 a year in fines. I know single communities that had over $100,000 in fines for stormwater matters. So rather than focus on ag, because we have a very strong ag lobbying group here, they looked at you all, again, the low-hanging fruit, because they already had a permit in your name that they could enforce. So the problem is that as we've moved forward, the Chesapeake Bay numbers haven't been where we might want them to be, so they've continued to tighten the screws, and compliance has become more and more costly. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the next permit that DEP is looking, but it's going to be even more difficult. The way it's currently structured, the regulations are formed around reducing sediment. Well, again, Virginia and Maryland, they aren't happy with the outcomes of Pennsylvania's focus on sediment. So now they're looking at volume reductions. Well, if we're not getting the sediment reductions through the current permit, maybe if we reduce volume and rate, then we will see better numbers with our calculations. So unfortunately, to attack stormwater from a volume perspective, that requires pipes and basins. Pipes and basins are more expensive than stream bank restorations. So, when you look forward, which we're supposed to be looking in 2025 for the new permit because they extended it 2 years, it's likely that compliance is going to be even more expensive and more difficult to obtain. So we're looking at today in a snapshot, but we also have to look out toward the future and how we're going to fund those regulatory compliance obligations that will unfortunately likely be much more difficult. The only bright side I can give you on that is they're supposed to be implemented in 2025. They haven't finished the draft permit yet. It's still in the work group, which means they haven't started the regulatory process to get it approved. So we got a little more runway in my estimation. Now, they haven't been amenable to our suggestions for some changes to give us more runway and an easier lift, but we do have a little runway. So we have this obligation to meet these regulatory requirements. If we don't, we're going to face hundreds and thousands of dollars of fines. So how do we pay for them? Well, unfortunately, there's currently legislation pending to amend the borough code to allow boroughs to charge stormwater fees directly. However, the Authorities Act was amended in 2013 to allow authorities to charge stormwater fees, and it was a very clean bill. It followed the outline of the existing code, which required reasonable and uniform rates. That's a generally, well, let's say I have 40 years of litigation and case law I can point to say I kind of know what that means. Now, when they amended the second-class township code, we were on the tail end of the city of Harrisburg's financial debacles. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but basically Harrisburg was taking millions of dollars from its authority each year. And they were using that money to buy wild, wild west artifacts and to fill a structural budget deficit that eventually required a receiver to step in and fix. They're doing remarkably well today, but they were basically siphoning millions of dollars off of their authority each year, some years upwards of 12 million. We represented the suburban communities to Harrisburg, and we were able to negotiate an out for them to get some of that money back. The downside of that is, of course, the state capitol nearly fell, and the legislature got involved, and after the Authorities Act was amended, the subsequent bills came through, and the legislature was distrustful of more fees because they were abused by the city of Harrisburg. So when the second-class township bill came through, they added language as a condition of approval that said, well, you can only charge fees that are the absolute minimum amount necessary to meet all these regulatory requirements. So if you remember, I mentioned earlier that the regulatory component is a pretty small portion of the overall financial pie. The big benefit that the residents see, that you all will see, is from the remainder of the program, which is usually more than 20 or more than 40% of the overall budget. And that's the real stormwater problems that your residents face on a daily basis. That's the flooding, all those things that they don't like to drive through high water. We can, through this comprehensive stormwater program, help mitigate. Well, the second-class township, the borough code legislation, all of those have this language that limits the fee to the minimum amount necessary to meet those regulatory requirements. So as I mentioned, unfortunately, folks aren't going to see everything you do to meet those regulatory requirements. That's going to be in the background. That's going to be stream restoration projects in the middle of a field that nobody ever goes near, and none of the good things. So that is one of the main issues we have, even if the borough code were to be amended. We're currently working on legislation for all of the other codes aside from the Authorities Act to remove that language through some education of the legislature, but we're not there yet. So, at the end of the day, the Authorities Act is still the most clear, and it's the one that we recommend. Now, the big issue, if you were to attempt to fund your stormwater program through taxation, the problem you're going to run into is real estate values have absolutely zero to do with the burden the property places on the stormwater system. So the other problem is that, generally speaking, your tax exempt entities are some of the biggest users of the system because churches have large parking lots. Large parking lots generate runoff. Churches have large buildings. Large buildings generate more runoff. Churches, because of all these large impervious areas, have less pervious to infiltrate that water. So what that means is you have more water flowing from tax exempt entities, generally speaking, into your system, into your streets, causing stormwater problems. And they won't help to offset any of that budget, any of that need, any of that burden. So what you're then doing is foisting their fair share onto your taxpayers, or you're going to reduce budget in other areas that they might benefit from to pay for these issues. So the tax exempts get off scot-free, the taxpayers pay more, or the taxpayers have reduction in service in other areas to offset that issue. When we look at this and have done some calculations, we typically see that to fund a stormwater program with taxes versus fees, your average taxpayer is going to pay between 40 and 90% more because of this issue largely. So the same taxpayer who might not like a new fee would probably prefer that new fee to a doubling of their real estate taxes to fund that.
Question about that. I had come up in a previous council meeting, and there was talk of, well, if just got to increase fees and just increase taxes, and like you said, I mean, the process to go through ordinance that increase taxes and all that other stuff, because, I mean, maybe in a magical world, somehow the state or the federal government will come and be like, hey, you know what, those regulations you have in your municipal, we're gonna pull them back a little bit for next year to make it easier on you. You know, I highly doubt that, so I can just see these costs going up, and who knows what it'll be 20 years from now. So you're saying that in your assessment, your experience, the fee actually in the long run is less expensive to the taxpayer than raising taxes.
Yeah, if we equate it to voters, it's definitely going to be more expensive for your average voter because they're a property owner, they're a taxpayer. A great example is Harrisburg. Almost half of the property is owned by the state. That's a whole other issue with their current refusal to pay. But you know, there are a lot of communities where they have an exorbitant number of tax-exempt properties that are generating a huge proportion of the runoff and the problem, and you know, they would pay nothing under a tax.
Yeah.
And let's face it, if you look across the Commonwealth, communities that have stormwater problems, the first thing they talk about when they start looking at a fee and building the budget is, look at all this deferred maintenance I have. Well, why do they have deferred maintenance? They have deferred maintenance because they don't have the money in their general fund to pay for the needed stormwater improvements because there's not enough tax revenue, and that's generally the case. And if you want to, what the other side of that coin is the area where most communities reduced their budgeting numbers to offset and move to stormwater, street paving. Well, you're still not doing enough for the stormwater, and you're not adequately maintaining your streets. And what's the first thing that starts to deteriorate when you're not adequately maintaining your stormwater infrastructure? Your streets. So you've doubled the problem. Now, let's look at having a fully funded budget through a fee. Where are most of your stormwater infrastructure? That's in your streets. So when you do a stormwater project, you get the added benefit of getting a paving project out of it that's cheaper because it's done alongside a stormwater project. So you have economies of scale. So the other thing we start to hear from residents is, I didn't know we were getting all these new roads because we have a stormwater fee. That's great. And I've literally seen that in my own community where I live, which was one of the first that had a stormwater fee. We have a lot of freshly paved streets. We have a lot less localized flooding. We have a lot less street flooding. So we do see real benefits from these programs. And, you know, flipping to the other side, not necessarily talking to you guys, but when I tell people this is why you should do this and how should you go about it, I say advertise those success stories. Take pictures before of problem areas. Then take pictures after of what it looks like after you've done a stormwater project paid for with your new stormwater fees. You're probably going to go ahead and hear about it from the public, but it's very good to have that as a PR piece. So you can advertise to the public, these are your dollars at work. Clarion Borough, that great example of that. Bradford City up in the northern tier, they don't have MS4. They have stormwater problems. They implemented fees. And generally speaking, their residents are ecstatic with the results from just daily life concerns. And part of that is advocating. This is what we've done. And the newspaper started picking up on all of these, you know, successful projects. So the other thing is there was a recent case involving a borough. It was the borough of Westchester versus Paschy. We did write the amicus brief on behalf of the Boroughs Association, all the alphabet organizations, PMAA, the Authorities Association, the Township Supervisors, all of those, because in that case, the Commonwealth Court got it wrong and said, well, Borough of Westchester, your fee is a tax as it relates to Westchester University. Well, Borough of Westchester is two things. One, it's a borough, and boroughs don't yet have the express authorization to charge a fee. And two, it's a home rule borough, which is an even more special animal. So one of the issues in that case is they said, well, you know, we're looking at these things and it's a question is whether you can charge a fee, so it must be a tax. That's now on appeal to the Supreme Court, and I'll talk through some of the reasons why we hope that gets overturned. But generally, it will help to educate you on how these stormwater fees should be established and things we can do to talk to the residents about how we're doing this appropriately based on, you know, case law across the country. So, you know, the question is, we need to have a fee. We need to make sure it's legally defensible. So how do we get there? The first is the purpose for general revenue raising means, which is the hallmark of a tax, or is there a regulatory component and a program associated with it? So here, you know, we'll have the MS4 component, we'll have the larger environmental program that it's supporting. So, you know, that's the big check mark there. The next is whether or not it's a voluntary charge. It's a terrible term. It's the one that courts use. Lawyers like to use words that don't often make a lot of sense. But what that really means is there a mechanism in place that you can modify your use of the service and have that affect what you pay. Sewer, that's really simple. Well, a lot of times that's really simple. Let's go with water. So with water, you pay for water by how much you use, generally speaking. So if you want to pay less, you use less water. Sewer, a lot of times, sewer rates and sewer bills are based on your water consumption. So because presumably what comes out of the faucet goes into the sewer system, and that's a general proxy for what you should pay. Well, it's difficult with stormwater. How do you accomplish this voluntariness? Well, that's through a credit program. So we'll talk about various credits that you should implement as part of your stormwater program to make sure you're meeting that. Some of those might be rain barrels for the public. You know, they can have a rain barrel in their house, get a credit. Some are gonna be, you know, are there large DMPs, structural basins that someone has constructed that maybe exceed the borough's requirements, and that means less stormwater going into the system. So those are the types of things that would go into that voluntariness provision. The next is whether or not the charge is in return for service. That goes back to, you know, what are we actually getting here? And well, when stormwater flows off your property, it generally goes into the street, which directs the water into an inlet, which goes into your pipe. That's the service you're providing. You're removing the water from their property, you're providing a place for it to go, and you're making sure that there's adequate capacity within that for the water to get to. So that's the service we're providing. That is very similar to the direct benefit. Again, water's coming off your property, it's going where we want it to go, it's getting to a stream, and there's room in the stream for it to go. The next comprehensive scheme, that's the one I talked about. We're looking to implement a comprehensive program here that deals with holistic operation of the stormwater program such that the residents are getting all the benefits and we're also ticking off the regulatory requirements. Finally, don't do a Harrisburg, put your money in your stormwater fund, use your money for stormwater. That one's pretty simple. Reasonable and uniform, that's kind of the big one. That goes back to the Authorities Act language that I mentioned. Basically that means, and this is the process we would use with your engineer as we develop the budget, make sure that the fee that a property owner pays is rationally related to the level of service they receive. And that's done through the budgeting process, determining what level of service you want to provide to the community for stormwater, and then making sure that the rates reflect that, but that they also have an option through credits to bring their bill down if their actual level of service warrants it.
So Lee, I have a question for you, Lee. The Knoxville Creek Watershed does a lot of work in the borough. I'm not actually on the board there, but going forward, if we decide to go forward with these plans or proposals, obviously it's a volunteer organization, they're always active, they want to do things. We would kind of funnel that through engineering to you, so you're on the same page to know what's going on, because that all is connected, obviously. And
then, like, we've even done things that, you know, we get creative with the credits. So say you have residents that volunteer for that organization. Well, they're providing a benefit to your program. And, you know, perhaps there could be a credit for those volunteers that do X amount of work through that organization on their own personal stormwater bill. We've implemented that with churches before. Like, we need to have these large meetings, well, we hope they're large, where we have public meetings to talk about stormwater. That's one of the MS4 requirements. Often, you guys have a great building. Maybe we get so much support for this program, we can't fit them all in here, so we need to have it at a church. So we might use the church, offer a credit. We sometimes do that with educational institutions, your schools. They often have areas that can fit a lot of people, so maybe they host some educational events. We've also done things where, say a resident adopted an inlet, and you know, one of the more annoying costs of operating a stormwater program is literally going around and cleaning out leaves from an inlet. Well, if property owner said, I'm gonna adopt this inlet right in front of my house. Okay, we'll give you X dollar credit. Can I donate that to my church so they can reduce their fee? You know, that's another sort of credit we've come up with before. So, you know, if you want to drive participation in this program, we've done some creative things to do that, while maybe helping to offset some of those tax exempts, because again, this is something new that they're gonna have to pay and they don't exactly have, they're not flush with money. So we want to encourage ways to allow them to contribute to helping with the problem and maybe reduce their bill through their constituent participations, you know, all of those things. So one of the questions we need to figure out is, do we want to drive participation in the credit program? And if so, how do we go about that? And we've a lot of different ideas. And then we kind of have this one catch-all. It's called partnership credit. And the first one we set up was Dairy Township Municipal Authority, that's Hershey. So I think we were a month into the program and somebody came and basically said, I have this idea for a credit. And I don't even remember what it is at this point. It's 13 years ago, or 10 years ago. And we kind of sat down, we looked at our program, and was like, well, we didn't think of that. So internally, we called it the we didn't think of that credit. Now then we moved to innovation credit, and then we realized they might not all be innovative, but they might still be good ideas. So we also have a partnership credit. And it's basically, we didn't think about that, but it's a really good idea. So let's figure out what the value is to the program and allow you to take a credit for it. That's usually more for non-residential properties because they usually have, you know, a bigger bang for the buck. The most recent example I can give, we recently found out it's a big, it's technically a quarry operator, but it's their office. So it's a huge structure, immediately adjacent to their massive quarry. It accounts for like 25% of the overall revenue of the program. We learned that they had this riparian buffer that they've been taking care of, and they didn't like exactly how much their credit was because it was maxed under the program. And they were like, no, this is where we think our credit should be based on our flow and all this engineering stuff. And then they said the magic words to me, and it's like, and we take care of this great riparian buffer on our property that keeps water from flowing onto this residential neighborhood next door. I said, oh, that sounds like a wonderful partnership credit. Let's stick an O&M agreement on it that you'll guarantee that you'll continue doing it for the next few years. And we can kind of, through that, do a cost benefit analysis and meet you at the delta between what you think you should pay, what our program says you should pay. Here's maybe where we can resolve that in a way that supports the program, but you know, it makes you happy and gives us a benefit. So we do a lot of that to drive participation from the public, whether that be commercial or your normal residential property owner.
We just have, sorry to keep interrupting.
No.
Just another question on that. So like, say we have a commercial property owner in the borough and they decide that they, you know, they're taking care of the riparian buffer, yada, yada, yada. They get that deduction or credit towards them having to pay their fee. I know you mentioned like for a multiple year kind of an agreement thing, but is that in perpetuity? Is it somewhere it's like just once and done for that year and then?
So the way we typically structure them, because again, this is a permit-based program. We typically have the credits tied to the permit term. So most of my, actually, I think it's March of '23, I think was when most of the credit policies terminated by their own terms, because that was the anticipated expiration of the current permit for most permittees. So we usually have it tied to that, the permit term of your municipal permit. So, but if they don't pay, we also have a provision that says your credits are revoked. Because shockingly, I've had people that didn't pay but thought their credit should continue. And I thought math was simple, but when I said, well, what is 25% of zero, which is what you're paying? Well, it's zero. Well, then I think your credit should be zero because you're not paying. So we're litigating that, and they actually sent a check in today for $400,000. So we eventually won that, but that's the other thing. We tie these credits to improve participation in, sometimes there are obligations, because sometimes it might be for a basin that, they're getting credit for. They're not really even meeting their minimum needs under your saldo or your stormwater ordinance, but they want a credit. That's low-hanging fruit. They could do a relatively cheap improvement to that basin, and then we'll have both the revocation of the credit that's benefit to them, and we would have an O&M agreement for that to go in and fix that basin in the event they didn't. So we also drive compliance with other, municipal regulations through this program. So here's the reasonable uniformity language I mentioned, and again, basically it needs to rationally relate to the level of service that the property is receiving. The second class township, again, I mentioned, was amended. I have draft language for that because we are working on an amendment to the authority's language itself based on the Westchester case, but that's not really relevant to today's discussion. But this is the part I was talking about. The second class township includes language that the fees can't exceed the amount necessary to meet the minimum requirements of the Federal Pollution Control Act, federal laws governing implementation of the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, et cetera. So for all the other reasons I stated, we don't think that is helpful because we don't know what minimum amount necessary means. Can you have a capital improvement portion? Because that exceeds the minimum amount necessary, a lot of questions, but I don't know what the legislature was thinking when they passed legislation that said, let's do the minimum amount necessary for the environment. I just don't think that sends the right message. So again, I mentioned we have the Borough Code Amendment in process. Frankly, it's been in process since before COVID. I don't know if it's gonna move. It's in committee now. They tried to add that. I got an email from the executive director of the Boroughs Association at 11 o'clock one night that the next morning at 10 a.m., the bills were gonna be in committee and they were gonna try and add that language. Can you send me an email explaining all the reasons why we shouldn't have that minimum language necessary? It left committee without that language, but we understand that the same legislator is going to try and add it again. So I expect that will just send it into a needless spin cycle, and I don't know when it will happen and if it will have the language we don't like. But the other side of that is by going with the authority, you have a non-political body that is responsible for the program. And that's helpful because it does remove it from the political sphere. However, through the program formation documents, we do have a lease agreement, a management agreement that really allows you all to set and establish the relationship between the authority and the borough such that you have some involvement in that process, so it's not a runaway freight train. You will have some insight in some input into the budget, which essentially sets the fee. So it's not going to be a situation where there's no council oversight of the stormwater program. So as I mentioned, that there has been some negative case law here in Pennsylvania, and again, that was a home rule borough case. It's not really between you and me because we're on Zoom, but that case had some unnecessary factual warts. There was some testimony and depositions that was unfortunately inaccurate, that was heavily relied upon by the court. The big one being the former manager testified that none of the money that was collected for stormwater fees was used to improve the system. It's not accurate. But the court said, well, if none of the money is going into the system that their stormwater dumps into, what benefit are they receiving? And the court ran with that. So one of the things we briefed is we tried to refocus the court on the other case law I'll cite throughout here, because this has been litigated all across the country. And from 2013 until now, except for Michigan, which I note here, no other federal court in the country had determined that a stormwater fee was in fact a tax until our Commonwealth Court decided to do so. And that was after multiple cases where our Commonwealth Court said it was an appropriate fee, so we don't know what they're doing.
Could you just repeat that again, because I'm trying to capture that.
So, let me see if I have, yes, okay. So if you go to that
I'm sorry for asking a stupid question, but I'm just having a hard time capturing the fact that we're the borough of Bath, we're mandated the stormwater authority, but we have no idea how we're going to assess the fee. And the Commonwealth is telling us to just go full force ahead. All right, I don't like to use sports terms, okay, but that's like lining up 11 people on offense. It's a 5-yard line, there's 11 people over there and say, you need to get there, but we have no idea how to get there.
didn't give them the ball. Score a touchdown, but don't give them the football.
There you go. I'm really having a difficult time just trying to understand this, not knowing that we as council and to our residents, we have a deadline. Okay, and I mean, my fear is the deadline is gonna come on December 30th of 2026, I know it's the 31st, but on the 30th, they're gonna say, okay, here's everything, go with it.
So.
And I'm saying that as a resident, not only as a council person, as a resident.
So that's been my life since January. That's been my life since January.
January of
this year when the case came out for Westchester. So
2023.
correct. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So being completely honest with you, obviously I've helped a lot of communities establish these programs. I've been watching, this borough Westchester case started in 2018. It's one of the slowest moving cases I have ever seen come through the Commonwealth Court. I watched, everybody in my office watched the argument because they're on TV.
Mm-hmm.
We had one of our associates sitting there. And within the first 3 minutes of argument, actually, let me say 5. Within the first 5 minutes of argument, I was texting clients saying, I'm not comfortable how this is gonna come out. And it was because of the types of questions that the judges were asking. The types of questions the Commonwealth Court judges were asking were particularly similar to those that are cited in the DeKalb case, that's the third bullet point. That case was decided in 2013. A lot of problems with that case, but the main problem I have with that case is since 2013, And other than Michigan, because they have a special provision in their constitution that tripped up those courts until recently when they saw the light, we'll say, and they've now decided that stormwater fees are appropriate. No other federal court that has considered this question has determined that a stormwater fee was a tax. Not one. In a few years before this case, Norfolk Southern sued the city of Roanoke, which actually I'm from about an hour north of Roanoke, so I know that system very well. Norfolk Southern and Roanoke litigated the question of stormwater tax versus fee. Norfolk Southern lost, city of Roanoke, their fee was upheld as being an appropriate fee based on the same exact test that every other court has applied, except DeKalb and now our Commonwealth Court. Actually, the Commonwealth Court sort of applied it, but how strong was that opinion in favor of stormwater fees? Norfolk Southern started paying stormwater fees in every state, including Pennsylvania, until I made them mad and they stopped paying my client until today. So if Norfolk Southern, who has all the lawyers in the world, looked at that decision in Roanoke and said, oh, this isn't good, we should just start paying and not fight, I think that's pretty good support for my position on this. The other problem with DeKalb is if you read the case, toward the end, the court says, well, you know, had this case been brought 2 months later, we wouldn't have had to consider this because the Clean Water Act was amended to authorize stormwater fees. Well, here in Pennsylvania, we have an Authorities Act that was amended to authorize stormwater fees. So why wouldn't the same logic apply? Well, when you read the decision, it appears that a particular endpoint was desired because the court never once cited the Norfolk Southern case, which is the most recent stormwater tax versus fee case. They cited it in 2018 in a different decision in the same case on a different procedural level. They didn't even cite it here. The most cited stormwater case that the country has ever seen was never considered by the Commonwealth Court. So of course, when you read our amicus brief, I think we cite Norfolk Southern 70 times. Now, the other issue and my main concern with this case back in 2018, because I have all my clients saying, we should just wait for this case, wait for this case, wait for this case. And my initial position was, well, you know, you got appeals, you got all these other things, like this could run for a long time. But my biggest concern was a home rule community isn't governed by the borough code that you all are. It's governed by its charter. And its charter can really do whatever it wants. And home rule communities are just a different breed. It's more like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh than you all in any other borough in the state. They can basically do whatever they want that isn't expressly not allowed. So my biggest concern was we were gonna get like a 1-paragraph decision from the Commonwealth Court that said, oh, they're a home rule borough, they can do whatever they want. This doesn't answer the question for any other authority, second-class township. Instead, I'm sitting there reading the argument or watching the argument, my worst case scenario suddenly becomes, they're gonna go the wrong way on this. And because of their flawed logic and the factual issues I mentioned, they did. But when you look at the briefs that were filed with the Supreme Court, they're very, very strong. The Commonwealth's attorneys have not done a great job, including blowing their deadline on their brief. At one point, the court was not going to allow their brief to be submitted. Eventually relented on that and allowed their brief to come in 3 weeks after it was due. And it's not a very strong legal brief. So we are hopeful that the court overturns it because although not the main decision, there were a few points in it that aren't controlling but are problematic for stormwater. That the court said they didn't like impervious surface as the means of charging a fee. Well, there are I think at least 6 decisions that say it's the best means of charging a stormwater fee, but yet our Commonwealth Court, first time they've ever considered the question, hates it. So I think there were some issues there. But to your main point, yes, it's incredibly absurd that we have these obligations because the governor many, many moons ago signed an agreement, and the first time they decide to actually do anything, or we seek to make them do anything to help us meet that agreement they made, they tell us to pound sand, including the city of Harrisburg. So one of the things we touched on in our brief was you have some of the poorest residents in the entire state. They already have a $315 million bill to, due to a consent decree with EPA for their combined sewer system. So their stormwater and sewers in one system. They already have to pay $315 million. And the Commonwealth for all those buildings in Harrisburg is not paying anything, $50,000 a month. So you take those poor citizens, and now suddenly they're taking $315 million, and they're gonna take on the full burden of the stormwater program. I don't think that the current construct of the Supreme Court is gonna like that. So we heavily pointed that out. Philadelphia, first time ever Philadelphia has ever joined a bunch of little municipalities like the rest of us. They were in on that amicus brief because it's like an $8 million hole for them. Is the Supreme Court gonna leave Philly? I hope not. So we have a lot of reasons to be hopeful that the court's gonna rule, but conversely, that case does not stand for the proposition that an authority can't charge a fee. That's not the question there. It's a completely different legal evaluation because we have an Authorities Act that expressly says that authorities can charge a stormwater fee. We're currently in the process of revising that statute along with the others to expressly state that state agencies have to pay stormwater fees and that they can be based on impervious surface. We're working with the governor, and if the governor signals he's going to be willing to sign that legislation, I don't know how they continue fighting the case in the Supreme Court because his name's on all the briefing because he was Attorney General when litigation was pending. So that's kind of the overarching how we're fixing this problem. So we've got the legal side, we've got the legislative side. But at the end of the day, I've always recommended authorities. I'm especially recommending authorities now because Norfolk Southern, great case. Southern judges know how to do it. We don't talk enough about Michigan. So here's my problem. One of the judges on the Commonwealth Court, not 3 months before she heard argument in the Westchester case, decided the Best Holmes case. That's the Chester Authority. Chester is very, very proud of this because they look at it like, hey, we got challenged right before Westchester and we won. And so the Commonwealth Court in this case said, well, we looked at this in Rizzo, which is also Philadelphia, and we looked at the tax versus fee question. And here we're looking at a fee that is designed to meet regulatory measures and to cover those costs of administering that regulatory scheme. So a stormwater fee is legally appropriate. This was an authority. So this is what, and we've of course pointed this out to the Supreme Court, like, hey, Commonwealth Court, they decided this one, then they decided this one, like how do you read those two together? But just remember this one's out there. So we're relying heavily on this Best Holmes case because we are litigating 6, I think, pieces of litigation where immediately after the Westchester case, people came out and tried to challenge the stormwater program because it was an illegal tax. So we're heavily relying on Best Holmes. There's also this Gibson versus Susquehanna Township case, which is, Susquehanna Township's on the east shore of the Susquehanna River outside of Harrisburg. I don't love it because it was a pro se plaintiff, so it was, a lay person representing themselves. I think, I can't remember what they're called, but they won't sign their name, they just sign X. they don't typically do well in front of courts because if you can't sign your name, judges don't generally like that. And this was one of those situations, but again, here the court said we have an express process by which the legislature authorized stormwater fees. That's what happened here. So we're going to support the fee. So that's two Commonwealth Court pieces of litigation that were successfully determined in favor of stormwater fee. We are, as I said, we're litigating a handful on behalf of our clients. We represent Capital Regional Water in Harrisburg now. You might recall I said we were opposite of the Harrisburg Authority. That's now Capital Regional Water, who's now our client. So we worked our way around the table there. So we're litigating stormwater fees on behalf of Capital Regional Water. That's an interesting one because CSR is a scrapyard. They recycle metal and they discharge directly to a water body that has not only a TMDL, a total maximum discharge limit, it's also the main project within Capital Region Water's pollution reduction plan. So they discharge directly to the body that we have to do the most work on, and yet they don't think they should have to pay it. That's legitimately their argument. Reading Blue Mountain is a little different. I helped Wyoming Valley Sanitary Authority form theirs. 31 communities came together, set up a stormwater fee. The railroad doesn't like it. It's essentially a privately owned railroad, and the owner's pretty stubborn, from what I've learned. We're litigating that. Every 2 months they come back and say, let's settle it. I heard that 2 months ago. I'll probably hear it in 2 months. That one may settle, but it's largely another direct discharge case. So that's sort of the 50,000 square foot view of what I think you should do, why I think you should do it, and what we're doing to support that effort on the back end through trying to deal with the Westchester case and other pieces of litigation we have. Again, it's a problem we have to tackle because we've been foisted these responsibilities, on your shoulders. We think this is a good means of handling them. We think it's the most fair to your taxpayers and all your ratepayers, and we think it more fairly approximates that cost of the service across the entire user base. So happy to take any questions, or if there are any areas you'd like to hear more about, or if there's anything from the public, I'm happy.
I have a question. Are you working with any other municipalities here in Northampton County that have established a fee? Or have any municipalities in Northampton County come together to?
This is, and I apologize for my geographical ignorance. I think.
Bethlehem is south of us.
Well, so I did
Allen
Bethlehem Township.
You did Bethlehem Township?
Yes.
Okay.
But I'm also working with, there's a lot of activity last year. So Ben Salem, I'm working with Ben Salem on their program, which is.
That's much more south of us.
That's Montgomery.
So Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, any of the townships, Moore Township, Hanover Township, Bushville Township?
Palmer.
Palmer Township, okay.
One of my associates was there last night.
Are they on their own or they're working
They're
with
going
Easton?
solo.
Okay.
We're also helping, we're helping Scranton. We don't know who all's gonna be involved with Scranton. But I'm in Lehigh Valley a lot right now.
Okay.
For this type of work. So we're talking to a lot of folks here. Some are on the early stages. Some we are working with, but in the last year and a half, this part of the state has kind of been a hotbed for where we're starting to see more and more activity in forming stormwater authorities.
So I don't want to sound ignorant, but I'm going to sound ignorant. What if the borough of Bath decides to do nothing? What is the fine or
How much
what?
is nothing?
Like, we're not going to do this.
So,
We're going to rebel.
well,
But we're not, but go ahead.
So 6 figures.
6 figures, that's what I need.
So in,
Easy.
one of my now clients, we weren't their lawyer then, their initial, and they took the headstrong approach. And they basically put their head down and then they lifted their head up and told them to go, do what you need to do to yourself to not make us do this. And I think it was about a day and a half later, they got a fine letter for $150,000. And around that time, which was about 10 years ago, EPA got pretty upset. And EPA came in and they fined a number of communities throughout the Commonwealth. And they were each high five, six figures. I think there were 13.
Annually?
That was the fine, and everybody complied. So now what I think is important is, we're kind of coming out of COVID. Things at DEP are starting to regulate. And I expect from that, you will likely see more and more activity because a couple of things. One, we're not doing well on our Chesapeake Bay reports. We have a new watershed improvement plan that's going to the countywide concept, all these things. And then we have a new permit cycle coming in. So I don't think the winds are in our favor. And it's been a while since they really tagged somebody.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I just want to point out that when the Municipal Authorities Act was amended to allow stormwater fees to be a utility fee, and many municipalities created authorities or used existing authorities to implement stormwater fees, and starting with the city of Philadelphia that initially, because of EPA action order, they were the first to break into this. The suits stating that the utility fee was really a tax, a rain tax, all those litigation for 10 years decided that no, if it's done right, the stormwater utility fee through the Municipal Authorities Act is a utility fee and not a tax. It wasn't until Borough of Westchester really screwed up and got cute and decided not to do an authority and to say, well, we're a home rule charter, we're gonna make this happen, and we're not even subject to the borough code. And Westchester University appealed it. That's where everything started going wonky. And it wasn't until the Commonwealth Court, which is where you go when a municipality is part of litigation, got the law wrong. And it, not only did they just not act and decide on whether the utility fee was a tax or whether the Borough of Westchester had the legal right to charge the fee, the Commonwealth Court went beyond what the case was about and threw into question the idea that impervious coverage is not fair and equitable. And that's what's, when he was relating to all the municipalities, including the city of Philadelphia and all these different agencies signing on to put briefs to the state Supreme Court, Commonwealth Supreme Court, was because that's been upheld all over the country, that impervious coverage is the most fair and equitable estimate for stormwater runoff. And that's why it's going to the Supreme Court. So you have DEP's unfunded mandate. You can pay for it based on your tax base, or you can consider creating an authority and create the fee based under the Municipal Authorities Act, and you're in a lot safer ground. And so that's trying to sum it up. So there's two different regulatory, trying to do it underneath the borough code, which isn't amended yet, and the legislature probably will take a pass until the Supreme Court decision, because no legislature is going to stick their neck out.
Right.
They'll let the courts be the bad guy. So either you're going, that basically leaves you could ignore DEP and wait for the fine. You could start working to come into compliance, and then in parallel with that, create a fee-based system that is not a tax-based system to help pay for it. And the idea that you know what your PRP is, you know what the permit that came out is, and you know what that, there's 3 projects.
Right.
Yep.
But to think that after you complete those 3 projects, that's the end of it,
No,
It's not.
no, we know that.
so.
And,
It's not, and that's very concerning. What's next? I mean, really,
So we don't know, I'm not on the work group, but I get consulted by folks that are on the work group pretty regularly. And as I mentioned, they're looking to move away from stream bank restoration as an approved project for reductions. They're uncertain as to how that's gonna.
help.
Everybody's doing these projects now. So they're kind of struggling with, wait, how do we switch midstream from allowing stream bank restoration to moving toward volumetric reductions? What do we do with all those communities that, and this is the other reason why I think not doing anything is a terrible decision, because all the haves are screaming at DEP right now and saying, we complied.
Right,
We
Sure.
spent millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure they are.
right,
What are you doing
Right.
about all these people who did
Right.
nothing?
right,
So now there's conversations about, the haves requesting that they not be moved into the new cycle until the have-nots have complied. Well, DEP doesn't like that because it takes longer. So that just means they're gonna ramp up on the have-nots. There's a concern that there's gonna be this situation where DEP says, you have until the new permit is due, the application is due, to complete all the projects necessary to comply with your pollution reduction plan under your 23 permit. Well, there's a lot of ARPA money floating around. Most of my clients are worried about getting contractors on board to complete the projects, to spend the ARPA money in time. And then you're gonna have DEP saying, oh, by the way, you gotta finish all those large construction projects in, a year and a half.
see, and that's something too with the
Right.
ARPA money, all these reviews for it. Anyway, so that was given to municipalities and all that other stuff. So, okay, so now these projects, if that money's being used for that, right? Okay, fine, dandy, it's taken care of. Now the state increases their next batch of regulations and the
Right, so
new
where's that
projects, and
money?
now you're going, well, you paid for that the last time. No, it was hard, but you paid for it. Well, yeah, but we had X amount of $100,000 here to back us up, and now, we're competing for grants, or we're doing whatever, and we're just supposed to pull this stuff out of thin air.
The other thing that is important along those lines is, for the first time ever, I'm an environmental lawyer.
You represent the environment or
I
the
was literally just gonna say, oddly enough, I don't like to call myself an environmental lawyer because I generally represent the polluters in one capacity.
Yeah.
But I practice in the area of environmental law. One of the things that's different about stormwater regulation, if you look at a sewer plant's permit, their MPDS, nowhere in there does it say you have to have a funding mechanism to pay for this. Now, let's move, because a lot of people didn't do anything, let's go and look at an MS4 permit. There's this new provision, it's the first time they've ever included it, that says you, as a condition of your permit, are required to have an adequate funding mechanism in place to satisfy the permit requirements. So, my question is, again, kind of going back to your comment earlier, wait a second, you won't pay, and you included this provision in our permit that says we have to have a funding mechanism that you won't help us meet.
Right.
So you kind of forced us into non-compliance by your non-payment, and you're the regulator. Because I'll tell you right now, DEP doesn't pay for the Rachel Carson building in Harrisburg. They don't pay for the Elmerton Avenue office for the South Central region. Yet, if we don't do anything, guess where we're gonna be meeting? We'll be using those buildings that don't pay their stormwater fee for how we're not meeting our permit.
Another question.
And don't use the restroom either while you're there.
I have a question, I don't know if it's more engineering or legal or both, but.
Stormwater runoff.
I guess just to put this in perspective, so we're a small borough, all right? We have I mean, we're a little biased, but it's rated the #1 creek in the Commonwealth, or like #2 after Center County or whatever.
Let's not give us credit somehow.
No, but so we have certain increased requirements because of that. Ron and I've had these conversations. So you have the Monocacy Creek, small borough, so limited money, right? That's been developed since probably before the Civil War, or long before that. 5 state roads, a lot of pervious, which is the one that's impervious where the water can't get in, right? So we have a lot of that stuff. So are we, I mean, of course, we're gonna think we're unique compared to other towns and boroughs in the Commonwealth, but I mean, again, and I know this is like Harrisburg, and I'd probably get further talking to the wall behind me, but like, you know, what is some of the stuff taken into account at all? I mean, limited funding and requirements, they haven't thought that deep into it, is my guess.
So, some agencies haven't thought into it. I will say, you know, PennDOT is a very attractive funding source right now, and we'd have to look at the financials and all of that stuff. But PennDOT is providing a pretty significant amount of low interest and grant-based funding for stormwater projects right now, including the costs of starting up an authority. So, you know, that they haven't typically covered that. They've been covering it. We've you know, worked with a handful of communities that have been successful in that. So PennVest, they're using their pot of money to try and help fund this. Now, the roads, the state roads, we typically exempt public roads from the fee. And there's a reason for that, and that's because technically speaking, the roads are part of your stormwater system. So by maintaining the roads, they're helping you maintain your stormwater system. The same for the borough streets. Because again, as I mentioned, what's the system? The water flows from the property into the streets, into the curb, into the inlets, into the system, to the creek. So that's the rationale for not charging for the actual roads. The other thing that PennDOT has done, because my township, they exempted their own roads and charged PennDOT, which obviously did make PennDOT very happy. But PennDOT won't pay the fee. They won't pay the fee for the regional offices. I mean, we talked about Commonwealth won't pay the fee. So PennDOT specifically, you know, first letter they ever sent me was that we're not paying our fees for our buildings. And I was like, well, they cite all these reasons that it's a road, and I'm like, well, that's not actually about the building. I think you just regurgitated the letter you sent to somebody else. But what they have done is they have partnered with municipalities on projects associated with state roads that provide a benefit to the program. So they wouldn't pay the fee, but they did pretty substantial projects as part of other PennDOT projects to kind of in-kind services. So if you're ever in, is anybody familiar with Hampton Township on the West Shore, across from Harrisburg? 581.
The Camp Hill?
Yeah. So 581 connects 81 to 83. It's the section without traffic. So if you look at those overpasses as you're driving along 581, there's a lot of new stormwater infrastructure, and that was all completed as part of the overpass and off-ramp, on-ramp improvements. And that was kind of an agreement amongst the Hampton Township and PennDOT as sort of a, we're not gonna agree to pay the fee right now, but here's some additional work we'll do. So PennDOT is doing some stuff like that. PennDOT is also, again, but it's going away, they are partnering with municipalities on sediment reduction purchases. And won't go down the wormhole, but it's been extremely beneficial to my clients for this purpose. Like dirt cheap sediment credits from these contracts that PennDOT enters into, and they allow full application of the credits generated to each municipality that participated. So Capital Region Water partnered with Susquehanna Township, Lower Paxton Township, and PennDOT, and everybody got full credit for every reduction from that partnership. So PennDOT is doing some things. I don't know if you have a liquor store here. The liquor stores are actually,
credits for
they're triple net leases. So, they
the
first,
volunteer anyway, they need to,
well, they first sent me a letter and said, we're not paying our fee. And it was actually Bradford. And the former executive director calls me and he goes, you know what's really funny? They don't own their building. And we never looked into it until they sent us a letter saying they wouldn't pay their fee. So we said, oh, that's right. We'll send it to the landlord,
Right.
who then passes it along to the PLCD, who now pays their stormwater fee inadvertently. That young female attorney is now no longer with them. That ended up being a bigger issue for the Liquor Control Board than they might have liked, but they now pay through their lease. So there are some that are trying to help, and there's not even consistency. IUP paid their stormwater fee until the Westchester decision, as I recall. I should actually check. I did theirs, I did their program probably in like 2014, and IUP always paid. Now Clarion University, they've never paid. And one of their former executives was on the authority that established the program, on the borough that established the authority to charge the fee, and then they just didn't pay. So it's not consistent, but it's getting more consistent in not paying.
and that's the thing too, like as a borough municipality, I mean, if a fee's developed, we're going to have to pay a fee for our properties, contributing to that?
Yeah, and that, if you go back to the beginning of the slideshow when I talked about that uniformity, I didn't really touch on that. That's the Hampton problem. If your fee's not uniform, if you look at your roads as being different than state roads, they're roads that are part of the system, so both should probably be exempt. Your building is really not much different than most institutional buildings.
There's a parking lot outside.
It has a parking lot, it's used by constituents, it's used, schools, same thing. Institutional users, which is generally the category that you would fit in, you should be the same as others. And, I fully appreciate that, you're paying money from here and it's coming over here. And
Yes, the taxpayers almost paying double because they're paying their taxes to maintain this property and the building. And then part of that's going to the MS4, but they're also for their property paying to the MS4. So
Now,
it's a fairness that all properties should be equal.
the other side of that is, if I were on the other side and I were litigating this, and I found out a community wasn't paying their own stormwater fee and I was representing a developer, first thing I would do is run, Your Honor, they're not even paying their own fee. And it's just not gonna be the best opening statement in front of the judge. Oh, why aren't you paying your fee?
Well, the thing is too, by the municipality paying the fee on the properties they own, it's less money that needs to be collected from the taxpayers, so you're not really paying double, you're saving that money by making a
The
payment, it's
economies,
just a question of how you're dividing it.
to scale it out, yeah.
Mike, you were to say something?
Yeah, I got two questions. One, you talked about flow rates being the next target. I've already noticed like the creeks have been lower, a lot of waterways in Pennsylvania. So like, if that's already seen, what period of time are we talking about that they were saying that?
They are actually looking to reduce the volume of flow from properties into the creeks. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the amount of pollutants that are going into the Chesapeake Bay. Well, how do you reduce the volume? You have an infiltration basin. The infiltration basin is designed to catch those pollutants, keep them in the basin so they're not exiting. So the thought process is by reducing the rate and volume of flow leaving property, you're sending less nutrients into the Chesapeake Bay.
All right, my second question would be, if you spin off a stormwater authority, that takes control over stormwater system, right? So does the value of that as an asset go underneath the stormwater authority, or does that stay underneath the borough? Because that would have effect on borrowing power, right?
Well, so, and again, this is kind of the next phase. You can either handle that in a couple of ways, and we typically recommend leasing it. for a handful of reasons. But theoretically, what would happen is you would have a lease agreement that would lease the stormwater system and all its rights for easements and things from the borough to the authority.
Doesn't that just open up a window for down the road for private industry to come in and start offering big money when boroughs get in trouble financially, like they did with the water systems down the running?
Nobody's looked to buy a stormwater system yet, because that's the least valuable system there is in the.
But, hey, if you gotta go, you gotta go, you gotta put a quarter in.
I will say that there is also legislation pending to stop that whole game.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is, that would generally require a public utility, and public utilities, as the code is currently constructed, the PUC doesn't regulate stormwater. So it's an interesting thought process. I don't even know if they can legally do that.
Because, you know, I think right now a lot of boroughs were, you know, Pennsylvania, the whole country really was flush statewide, so they had money to spend. But when you get back into areas where like they're hitting their borrowing limits, and now we've spun off that water authority, but you have that water authority now being able to take out extra loans, you have limits to what your citizenry is able to be.
So generally speaking, utilities, those borrowings are exempt.
Right, and that's what, you're now exceeding that, so if the understanding is that your tax base can afford 60%, let's say, and we're up at 60%, now we're spinning off authorities so that we can create even more borrowing power, you're causing a big problem.
Well, but any of the debt associated with your sewer, water, stormwater is excluded from that debt calculation already. It's called self-liquidating. So if debt is self-liquidating, that theoretically, they're supposed to look at the rates to make sure the rates fully offset the lease payments. They actually don't have the power to do that, but you send in a sheet of paper, you say this is self-liquidating debt, DCD stamps it, and it comes out from that borrowing base already, so it's not within that borrowing base, so it doesn't actually impact the borough's ability to borrow.
Right, thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments?
There's like really no way to show the taxpayer that this is actually working either, no.
I actually think there is. I would say more so than any other enterprise or utility. You know, when you look at sewer, how are you ever going to photograph a sewer project? Unless you're a combined system and say, look at this great $5 million we put in pipes in the ground. The only thing they're ever going to see, and if you drive down Front Street in Harrisburg, you would have seen a pipe running along the river for like 3 years. Well, that pipe eventually got buried, and now nobody knows that there was ever anything done there. Water, kind of same thing. Like you don't really look at your water coming out of your spigot and say, wow, that looks a lot cleaner from that $5 million we spent on a new filtration plant. Conversely, stormwater. Now, yesterday, different animal, but you know, you do projects, and most of those projects are designed at increasing capacity in different parts of the system, so that's not happening. And you do see an actual improvement to the flooding around your community because of these projects. You know, it might be as simple as you have a bridge that has a culvert under it and it's flooded historically, and it might be because that culvert is slightly small. Well, as use of your stormwater fees, you could use it to improve and enlarge that culvert to allow more flow to get through so you're not flooding that bridge anymore. You have the downstream benefit because you're not flooding the bridge. You have the upstream benefit because people are able to get more stormwater into the creek. So White Township, we litigated for years with this guy about, you know, he direct discharge to the creek. And finally I asked him, like, have you noticed that your parking lot doesn't flood anymore? He goes, that's true. It's like, I haven't had to shut down that end of the warehouse in a long time. I was like, they spent $3 million upstream and downstream of your property on culvert work that increased the capacity of the stream that you discharge to. Why do you think you don't have flooding anymore? And he said, oh, that's an interesting thing. He looked back and the date's, almost immediate. And I said, yeah, it's an actual benefit you're receiving, and we settled that, and he moved along. So I actually think generally with stormwater, there are projects that you can demonstrate that provide a tangible improvement.
Yeah, I just was kind of thinking convincing people to pay, we have different fees, well, like garbage. We have X amount of people that refuse to pay their garbage bill. We're gonna have X amount of people that are gonna say, why do I need to do this? And as you already mentioned, that downstream, all the way to Chesapeake, they already said that it's not technically working, so you can't say, oh, well, this is the benefit, and you get.
Yeah,
I mean, you're one part of this, but I'm thinking of us, more or less, as dealing with the taxpayers, answering the phones, what is this? Because you can see how people are here.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid concern.
A lot of people, I think, are gonna be shocked, and they're gonna wanna ask questions once they get that bill in their hand.
So kind of from the PR perspective, what we recommend is being overly public about everything that's going on. I always say it's worth having the one meeting with 300 people with their tomatoes yelling at you, and getting through that 3 hours, knock it out. And that really does eliminate a lot of the angst. You're still gonna have some. Now, conversely, I have a client who, despite my best advice, didn't do that. And you could not get through the phones for 2 weeks solid, because they never had a big public meeting where they talked about this new fee that was coming. And then I had another client that literally issued the bills on March 11 of 2020.
Oh,
So they arrived at houses on March 13th, which I believe was the Friday. Yes, it was Friday the 13th. They got their sewer bill and the state shut down.
right.
Good day.
I guess that's
Go ahead.
no, that's a good question. I mean, in the past, we've done town halls for various
I was
topics.
gonna say that.
So you're open to something like that if we were to decide to have a town hall that you could be there?
So they can throw tomatoes at you.
The first one of these I ever did, and I remember like it was yesterday, because I was a bit younger and maybe more positive about things. And I'm sitting front row, I'm sitting right in that seat, right? And so imagine this guy sitting behind me where Mike is at, okay, imagine I'm sitting there and the guy's sitting in Mike's seat, and I'm talking, and all of a sudden stands up behind me and starts calling me the legal devil. And I'm like, what? He was a deacon at a local church, and I was the devil because I was taxing God's rain. And I said, well, I'm not taxing it, sir. Wrong line of case law. He goes, well, I'm a lawyer. I was like, that's wonderful. Go read those things. That church is actually the highest participant in the credit program for that township, and it all started with me being the legal devil for taxing God's rain.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
I know.
If you, the city of Lancaster probably did the best job of public relations before implementing their stormwater fee. And their website will tout all the different benefits. And they were amazed that by their public outreach and public education, how little complaints they got at when the first bills went, because everybody knew it was coming. There were no more questions to be asked. It was all
They have a
done.
very nice mayor. She's very in touch with her community. I'm not kidding now. I met her.
That's fine. I
She
mean,
has, everything is out there.
right. But their website, if you go there, they have all their, and again, they're 10, 12 years into the program. So they can show actual projects and actual benefits, and it's all there. And they do a very good job of publicizing.
So the Public Works Director for Lancaster is now the Executive Director at Capital Region Water. So you see the same thing there. And That got pretty political because there was an election intervening, and at one point the mayor threatened to sell the water and sewer system. We didn't delay the implementation of the stormwater fee because of the election, and magically we said we would do it in December or January, and this was October, and suddenly the RFPs for selling the water and sewer system went away because it wasn't an election issue. But those are two great examples, especially Lancaster, because I don't know if you've seen the famous video of the three people throwing the 5-gallon bucket on the basketball court, and it just disappears, because it was a pervious basketball court. I don't think it's actually pervious anymore, because it's very difficult to maintain that, but it was a cool video at the time.
Mike, you
One more
know,
question. You talked about, they hand out credits, right?
Yep.
Who finances those credits? Is there somebody that reimburses that credit?
So, and that's one of the difficult things about credit.
I think down the line, everybody's gonna game the system to the point where there's gonna be that one thing that is super simple to do to earn credits, and then all of a sudden, the borough's a
area
lot.
buffers are probably why they're taking away the creek restorations, because it's easier and less expensive than, because we've been doing a lot of that. Well, I mean, there's still more that has to be done, but started doing that. But yeah, I mean, that's like gravy compared to this stuff.
Nobody really understands why they're doing that. I think as far as the credits, one of the issues with credits is you're necessarily increasing expenses to decrease someone's bill, right? So we offset that partially through an application fee. There's gonna be staff time to work through that. But at the end of the day, the large majority of the types of credits that are typically offered are significant benefits to the system with relatively minor administrative burdens from the front. But say it's a big B&P retrofit, and it's gonna require a lot of the engineer's time reviewing. One of the things we've done is
I'm talking about like for just homeowners, like you can get a credit for a rain barrel, right? So like, what if everybody decides to put up a rain barrel, now all of a sudden, funding in half?
Rain barrel, good example. What we typically recommend for rain barrels, it's a great PR. There are grant programs where DEP will give you the rain barrel, and then you have a rain barrel like event, and you talk about all the benefits of rain barrels, and then everybody that comes gets a rain barrel.
That's the worst shit wants us to do.
Well, then they get a small one-time credit. So it'll be a one-time credit for the rain barrel, because we all know, you drive by those rain barrels and they're overflowing. Nobody takes care of them. But guess what? You got people, instead of yelling at you about your fees, they got the rain barrel, they got the credit. It's probably saving just in staff time, the cost of that rain barrel, not having more yelling at you at your meeting and extending your meeting by 2 hours. And the resident feels happy. And for every one person that lets them overflow, there are those 10 that, actually get into it, and they start using the rain barrel, they start using it for irrigation purposes, they do all the good things with rain barrels, and the actual cost was pretty low. Generally speaking, the residential credits are pretty limited, but most of them are frankly kind of feel-good credits that do provide some benefit. It's the adopted inlet type things, the rain barrels. So, the residential ones, they are kind of to get people involved and participating in the program.
Just so you understand, there is no credit that eliminates your entire bill.
Right.
They're nominal decreases to your bill. There's no getting out of it because I did this. So the fee is made up of both funding capital projects and the operation and maintenance of the existing system. And so when we start looking at the financials, you'll see that there are some benefits because the fees are paying for some of the things that the road crew through your taxes is already doing. So we'll get into all those details, but it's the operation and maintenance of the system, and it's the capital projects that are going to meet the regulatory standards. And then there's also those wonderful projects down the road that can really do some watershed improvements.
Yeah, and Ron and I actually walked the creek with the chair of the watershed board which we'll give in a report at the February meeting, some findings and such with that, but let's decide. Any other questions, comments at this
I have a
stage?
question.
Go ahead, Lauren. Yeah.
I heard you use the term home rule.
Yes.
Borough, what, I'm not familiar with that, can you explain what that is?
I should probably look up how many home rule communities there are. So a home rule community is kind of a separate animal. So you have your, well, let's just talk regular municipalities, right? You have boroughs, you have first-class townships, second-class townships, third-class cities. We won't talk about all the county options. Then you actually have this very small subset of a special version of a second-class township, which is kind of like a home rule, but I think the statute only existed for a handful of years, and that's actually been saved. They're a special type of township in a lot of ways. So with home rule, it's essentially a charter. So, have you done any of the PSAB new borough council member trainings? What they'll talk about is they'll say, you've got the borough code, and these are all the things you can do in the borough code. And what they don't say, because they're the boroughs association, they're not the home rule association, they don't say that a group of electors can choose to craft their own charter, which is the rough equivalent of the borough code. It can go to a referendum, the voters can vote on it, and you can make yourself a home rule community. And what that really means is you can make your own rules for yourself. So a home rule community is essentially a type of community that went through this voting process to establish their own charter. You see that with a lot of cities, not a lot of cities, you see that with some cities, you see that with some boroughs, but it's overall, it's pretty rare. But it all goes back to there's this thing called Dillon's Rule, and Dillon's Rule says you all as a municipality only have those powers that the state says you have. Same thing, states only have those powers that the feds say we have. Well, Dillon's Rule doesn't apply to home rule communities, so they can do whatever they say they can do. So they provided a statutory process to do that. So it's very rare, but that's frankly one of the issues with the Westchester case, is that literally the most rare municipality type in the state decided to sue the state.
Says Allentown is home rule.
Yes.
I know, in Northampton, I know it's a county thing, but Northampton County has a rule charter, so they're rule.
Yeah.
Real quick, Frank.
Yeah.
Just Lee or Ron, I mean, there was reference to the Chesapeake watershed when we're in the Delaware Bay, but we have to follow the same stringent mandates, just so we're clear on that.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments for this portion of the meeting? No? I'm sure we'll see you at the meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Around,
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. If you have any questions,
Thank you, Lee.
please send them to Brad and I'll.
Did you want any next steps, Frank?
What's that?
Next step, we're gonna be back in the MS War committee. And
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna go back to MS4 committee to follow up on next steps, to report to council. And obviously hear from engineering as well in that committee, so. Is there anything you need from us at this juncture?
No, I think we're good. Do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, that's fine, Lee. Yep, appreciate it.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Thanks.
So there's one thing I wanted to bring up to council, for wrap up the meeting, and if anybody else has anything they want to add, but, as is the stipulation that has been in the past, the three check signers are president, vice president pro tem. Obviously, Michelle and I have been signing checks. We didn't take a motion, I don't think, the reorganization meeting for Manny to be added as a check signer. So, Brad, is there any procedure?
Just since Jamie's not here, do you have to vote to amend the agenda first?
Hey, that's a good, look at that, you know what, now, that's why he's our
We have
engineer,
it.
not only does he engineer.
I didn't even
infrastructure, he
stay at a
engineers
Holiday Inn
agendas.
Express
I
last
have
night.
a motion, Glenn, go ahead. I have a motion to amend the agenda. Motion by Jim,
And that's the agenda for what?
Amend the agenda
for
To add?
add
A check sign.
the triple check sign.
Thank you.
all right, so the motion was made by Jim, do I have a second? Second by Doug. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it, okay,
Staying?
yes. you need to
Yeah,
abstain. So, and obviously I can't make the motion, but does anyone want to make the motion to add our pro tem, Manny Mirabito, as another check signer?
I'll make a motion to add Pro Tem Mirabito to the list of personnel that can sign checks. So it'll be President Hesh, Vice President Urgot, and Pro Tem.
Just a side note too, well, do I have a second from Jim? Do I have a second from anybody?
Second.
All right, second from Sam. Just a side note before we vote, checks require 2 signatures. So new council members, it's not just anybody can just sign a check, so.
Typically we have 3 council persons and myself.
So a lot of the times if, we all have our regular jobs and we're around and you get alerted, hey, we're, paying the monthly bills, we need some check signers, so whoever's closest by can stop by and sign, so, or sometimes after meetings we have them, so, all right, any questions or comments? All right, hearing none, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Abstain.
And we have 1 abstention. All right, thank you. Any other, little bits of business that we have to take care of before February? No? All right, so anything else council wants to add to the order? Hearing none, I would like to, our junior council member, I told her like at every meeting now, I want her to be the one that asks for the motion to adjourn, so junior council member Goldfarb, would you please ask council for a motion to adjourn? That's what I have to say, a motion for adjourn.
Motion for adjourn.
Motion.
Motion by Manny.
Second.
Second by Jim, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Meeting adjourned at 7:50 p.m.
Very good.
Very good. Very good,
Yeah, we
Ron,
have-
on
Just
amending the
glad that
agenda.
she adjourned this meeting.
We had an open.
You've been hanging around Jamie too long.
Yeah, we were good either way.
I've been a municipal engineer for a long time.
Yeah, you've been, this is not your first clam bake.
First clamping.
First rodeo.
Oh my God. That's hard.
Thank you, everybody.
Do you need this turned off or anything?
Just listen to Liam. Oh, okay, wait a second.
I know, it's,
Wait a second.
it's staggering.
The Commonwealth said that boroughs should establish
Yeah, okay.
a authority